Greetings and welcome to the latest edition of the Theogenic Evolution Podcast. As always, I'm your host Martin, and I'm happy to have you with me today. For this week's episode, my guest is author Alan Waugh, here to talk about his new book, Alchemical Ayahuasca, as well as his Healing Retreat Center and his life of moving from being a young man in England and going off to India and emerging out of his chronic depression into a completely new mode of being and worldview. He's got a fascinating story, and he shares a lot of details about it here on the podcast, and we will get to that conversation in just a minute. But first, a few announcements as always. I'd like to start off announcements today by thanking Jay and Nathan, both of whom signed up at the God Molecule level over at my Patreon page, patreon.com/MartinWBall. With that level of patronage, that gets both Jay and Nathan a monthly 1-hour video call, check-in, and integration session with me. Both Jay and Nathan have already made use of their calls for this month, and I look forward to speaking to you guys next month. Thank you for your support, and I'm happy to be able to offer you support in return. If you, the listener, would like to support this podcast and perhaps receive some support in return, I invite you to stop by at patreon.com/MartinWBall. There's everything from $1 a month up to $100 a month, which also gets you that 1-hour monthly call, as I have already mentioned. There's no obligation. You can come and go as you please. You can change your support level, and any support at $20 a month and up gets you full access to the Theogenic Evolution archive, featuring hundreds of hours of talks and interviews and conversations that are no longer available actively here on the podcast or found anywhere else on the web other than at the archive over at my Patreon page. And of course, as I always like to mention, if you are looking for integration support in any capacity, I do specialize in 5-MeO-DMT, but I'm not limited to that. But I'm always available for 30, 60, or 90-minute video calls to help you integrate your entheogenic experience from a non-dual and energetic perspective. I'm also always happy to meet with people who are facilitators or researchers or just have inquiries about this entire world of psychedelic healing and transformation. And I'm always happy to set up a call with you. You can stop by at martinball.net if you want any more information about my integration or consultation services. And the last announcement that I have for today is that I just want to announce that enrollment is now open for the September offering of my 5-MeO-DMT Integration Specialist Training Course with Mindscape Institute. This course is specifically designed to bring my experience and expertise with helping people integrate their 5-MeO-DMT experience into the classroom to train others in this skill and in this offering. I like to say that if you are someone who offers psychedelic integration, but you are unfamiliar with 5-MeO-DMT, then you really don't know how to help people integrate it because it's so different, it's so unique, and it really requires a specialized approach. And that's what this class offers. And so it's open to anyone who just wants to learn more about this subject, but in particular, it's for people who want to offer psychedelic integration. It is for people who facilitate 5-MeO, but want to strengthen their skills and abilities and knowledge base on the integration and aftercare side of things. And also, I would say it's open to any therapists or psychiatrists or psychologists who might be working with clients who are having experiences with 5-MeO-DMT, but don't really know how to relate to them or understand what's going on with what they're sharing. And these are the kinds of students that I've had before, and this is what I'm looking for this next round of the class. It's a 9-week class that meets once a week. All the teaching materials are provided in the course. We have live instruction. There's lots of supplemental materials. And I'm just going to be promoting this pretty much every week from here on out. That it's about just over 3 months away, but enrollment is now open. It's limited to 15 students. If you want more direct information, you could just swing by at martinball.net/courses, and you can see some of the basic information that I have up about the class. You're always welcome to email me if you want more information. And also, something I'm going to be doing over the next weeks and months here on the podcast is I'm going to be including either short audio endorsements that my former students have made about the class, or in some instances, little mini interviews that I'm conducting with students who have had the course with me and sharing those here before the official main interview comes on the podcast. So just to get us kicked off with this promotion for the integration training course, I have a short statement made by one of my former students. And again, you can stop by at martinball.net/courses, or you can go over to mindscapeinstitute.org, and you can enter your name and email to receive an automated response with more information about the class. But enrollment is open, limited to 15 students. Maybe I'll see you in class. And also, just let me say, before we get into the conversation with Alan, he's got 3 different websites. So I'm just going to mention them now, and they're also mentioned at the very end of the interview. There's alchemicalayahuasca.com, spiritwisdomhealing.com, and sacredvalleyspiritualretreat.com. Okay, that's it in terms of announcements. Please enjoy this little audio endorsement from one of my former students, and then we'll get right into the interview with Alan Waugh talking about his new book, Alchemical Ayahuasca.
Hello, my name is Megan Esquera, and I came to Dr. Ball's 5-MeO integration course because I knew that there were layers of this work that I hadn't even begun to touch yet. I work with people who are going through some of the most profound expansions of consciousness imaginable. Moments where their ego dissolves or boundaries between self and everything else just collapses. And I strive and wanted to be a cleaner and clearer vessel for that process. Not just as a facilitator, but honestly just as a human being navigating myself. So if you're drawn to this medicine, if you work with it, or you're simply someone who wants to understand the deeper mechanics of what happens when consciousness meets itself at that level, I would highly recommend this course. Dr. Ball goes very genuinely deep, and I do feel that I walked away more expanded, more grounded in my purpose, and also more equipped to just hold space for the kind of transformation that actually changes the trajectory of a soul. I would highly recommend.
Well, I am welcoming on to the Theogenic Evolution podcast today Alan Waugh, who is an author. We're going to be talking about his new book, Alchemical Ayahuasca. He's also a shamanic healer and all-around medicine kind of guy. Currently in Ecuador, I do believe. Is that where you're at right now?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Alan, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Martin.
Yeah, well, I often like to begin with where you are in the world. Tell us a little about where you are in Ecuador.
Yeah, we're in Diana, my wife, and I, we moved to Vilcabamba in southern Ecuador in the Andes mountain range. It's a little hub of spirituality, a little bit like Mount Shasta where I used to live. So it's a beautiful place. It has a reputation for being a center of healing. It's also known as the Valley of Longevity because of the long ages that people live here. You know, the Ecuadorians have lived here, over 100 years is common. And part of that is not just that it's a blue zone, but because it's very steep. We're in the mountains. And so it's an agricultural area. So people have to hump up and down the mountains to get to their fields. And so they get a lot of exercise in. So that's another reason for it. But it is known as a blue zone. And it's also an area that the Incas used to send their soldiers to heal if they got injured. So it has that reputation and one of the reasons why we moved here.
Yeah. So how long have you been in Ecuador now?
We've been here 3.5 years. We actually came here on our honeymoon about 5.5 years ago and not planning to move. We had a thriving business in Mount Shasta, Northern California, and very well known. And we had a lot of, sold out retreats and did many different types of retreats, including ayahuasca retreats, usually sold out. And anyway, after we came back from our honeymoon, we liked Ecuador and thought, well, this is, it was a nice vacation. We actually came here to go on a medicine retreat, actually, as part of our honeymoon. And we got back, and then I just got a nudge from above that said, you're moving to Ecuador next year. And so I said to Diana, hey, I just heard that we're moving to Ecuador next year, and that was 2021. And she said, okay then. And so we spent a year getting our place sold and downsizing, and we moved here and have now created a retreat center down here. We bought an old horse ranch and turned it into a little retreat center. It's kind of more boutique-y than the one that we had in Mount Shasta.
Nice. And I'm just curious to ask, with the various military interventions and things that are happening now in the Western Hemisphere and around the world, have you guys been impacted by that at all, especially in terms of like travelers? I know that like there's been issues with flights and things, but what's the impact for you guys?
We had no impact in terms of being able to leave or arrive. You know, Ecuador has, in the last few years, had a bit of a problem with narco traffickers that come in from Peru, which is to the south, and Colombia, which is to the north, and they've been using Ecuador as a place to to smuggle their drugs out of. They have a deep port in Guayaquil with a lot of boats sending bananas all over the world, and they've been smuggling the cocaine. So there has been an influx of gun-related violence related to the drugs. And actually, last month, the FBI just opened an office here, which is sort of, we're not sure about how we feel about that, the fact that the FBI have come in down here. So because the Ecuador uses the dollar as a currency, we are under the influence of the US because of that. But now they moved the FBI down here. So that's actually helped with the violent crimes of the narco traffickers, because they don't want to get involved with the US. So that's been helpful. But in terms of ease of movement, nothing's shifted.
Well, now that you have an FBI office, before too long, I'm sure you'll have Kash Patel down there taking selfies, swigging beer.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and not only that, we had Marco Rubio and Kristi Noem make 2 visits down here, which was,
really?
It was also a bit questionable, but anyway, we just hope it's for the best and for the security of this beautiful country.
Yeah, well, I'm sure Kristi Noem was wearing a delightful outfit, as she was wont to do in her role, and probably Marco didn't fit to his shoes. That's the latest I've seen about him.
Oh, really? Yeah, she was wearing her 20-gallon hat, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, thanks for a little info about Ecuador. I was just kind of curious because I've never been further south than Costa Rica, but my son, who's about to turn 13, he, like me, he's a big birder, and so he's actually been researching Ecuador, and it's like, okay, Dad, like here's some places I want to go in Ecuador, and I'm like, well, it's a little more uncertain than just going to Costa Rica, but definitely interested.
Yeah, and actually Ecuador and Colombia both vie for the position of the most biodiverse country in the world in terms of birds.
Yeah. Well, that's what's got my interest. Yeah. I've looked at some pictures and like, okay, well, I've seen that bird in Costa Rica, but I haven't seen that one. Costa Rica, I've seen that one. So, it's definitely something we're considering, but haven't made any commitments yet.
Yeah, it is amazing. Yeah, the nature is just incredible.
Yeah. Love the jungle and the cloud forests and all of that.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get back to Ecuador, but as I'm sure, as the listeners can tell, you're not from Ecuador, and we've already talked about you've recently moved there, and you've already mentioned Mount Shasta, Northern California, and well, I'd hope the listeners can tell you're not from there either. So let's kind of start with where you have in your book. And so just for listeners, again, we're talking about your book, Alchemical, Ayahuasca, and I'd say it's kind of, well, I wouldn't say it, you would say it. It's right here in the table of contents. It's fundamentally broken down into 3 parts. The first part is somewhat autobiographical. Then it gets more specifically into ayahuasca, sort of continuing with some of the autobiographical stuff, but more about how to work with ayahuasca and the experiences you've had. And then it turns more into part 3. I would kind of characterize it as healing advice or spiritual advice. So we've got these 3 parts of your book, but let's start with part 1. And I'd like to invite you to share your story from obviously not coming from either Ecuador or Northern California, but how you ended up in these places and what brought you to where you are now.
Yeah, well spotted. Yeah, I'm actually from London, England, and South London, and I spent the first 28 years of my life there. And I was chronically depressed. I was suicidal, suicidal ideation. And at the age of 28, I'd sort of had enough. I thought, I can't carry on living like this. And I remember I was sitting on the floor of my apartment where I lived alone in South London. And I was like, this is it. I can't carry on. And I decided that was the day I was going to die. And just sitting on the floor, just planning how I'm going to do this, a voice spoke to me, and he said, "Do you want to live or do you want to die?" And I was like, "That's odd, but it's a serious question. I better give a serious answer." And it's like, "Well, I want to die. Obviously, this is all I want to do right now. I don't want to carry on living, the way that I have been." And he asked again. He said, "Do you want to live or do you want to die?" And this is completely new for me. I'd never had any sort of intervention or any communication with any unseen being, even though I was raised Christian in a highly religious sort of family, taught by nuns and monks throughout my schooling. I'd never spoken to Jesus or anything like that. I prayed to the angels, etc., as a lot of young Christians do. But I never had anybody to speak to me. But I knew that this was, a serious communication from another plane. Assumed it was an angel, and I just don't want to die. And he asked again, do you want to live or do you want to die? But not only did he ask me, he taught me something in that moment. He taught me how to look inside myself, because up to that point, I was, as many people are depressed, very sort of self-absorbed. And I realized that I was sort of addicted to depression. I obsessed about depression and almost found it comforting in some weird way to have this relationship to depression that kind of gave me a sense of something. But he taught me showed me how to look inside myself and to touch a part of myself that was actually more open and soft and loving. And that was a completely new feeling to me. I sort of looked into my heart, and in that place where I contacted my heart and saw this expansiveness that was there, that's something that was very new to me. I just thought, I want to live, but I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to live. How can I live? Because I had no desire to carry on living in that depression, that depressed state. And he said, I'm going to teach you what you need to do. But first of all, he said, Alan, accidents have consequences. And if you continue to live your life in the way that you have been living, nothing will change. You have to change the actions of your life. And I said, well, how? What do I do? He said, you're going to have to leave England. You're going to leave England. There's a very clear directive. You're going to leave England for 18 months and you're going to find yourself. He was guiding me towards the hero's journey that I knew nothing about at that point. You're going to find yourself. And he didn't say where to go, but he just said, you're going to leave England. You're going to go on a spiritual journey and you're going to find people similar to you. And it's the people that you meet that are going to help to change your life. And I just said, yes, okay, I'll do it. And, for somebody that I was very busy with work, I had a construction company and employees and very busy. And really I was a workaholic. So I just decided I would give that up. And I was going to go on a journey. And I realized in that moment that it would be India, because that was the country that I felt people could embark on spiritual quests and journeys. Where I was surrounded by a lot of Indians in South London, and I kind of knew it.
The Beatles did it, so
yeah, exactly. That fully helped as well, knowing that, and hearing about Maharaji and reading a bit about spirituality in those days. And so I did. In three months, I gave everything up. Handed my business over to my partner, and got the plane to Delhi, and that was the start of my journey. And I did actually stay on the road for 18 months to the week, and I did a lot of soul searching in that time. And just by amazing sort of synchronicity, I arrived in India at the time of the largest spiritual festival in the world that happens every 12 years, called the Kumbh Mela. There were a lot of Westerners that were going to India specifically for that, and I didn't know anything about it until I started talking to them. And so I went there, and so in the Kumbh Mela, it runs for about a month. and they reckon about 150 million people go through that festival in that month. So it's massive, and it's people from all over India, people from all over the world who are into Hinduism. And so India sort of came to me in that moment. I didn't really have to travel around India to explore Indian spirituality. It was like it broke open my head, and what a beautiful way to start that journey.
Yeah.
I did many sort of adventures. Yeah, that was the biggest one probably.
Yeah. Well, I've got a couple questions for you. First one is like a totally irreverent question, but have you ever seen the TV show An Idiot Abroad?
No.
Well, it was a show that was produced they did a few different seasons, and the British comedian Ricky Gervais took a friend of his, this guy named Carl.
Yeah. I have heard a few episodes on the radio, on something, YouTube or something like that. Yeah.
So had you seen or heard anything about when Carl went to India?
No, I don't think so.
Well, he also ended up at the Kumbh Mela, and so he went around and he like met with some of the sadhus, and just one that's standing out in my mind at the moment. So I used to show clips of this when I taught Intro to World Religions at Southern Oregon University. So when we get to our India section, and what I want to emphasize with my students is that religion in India is very different from religion in the West. And so we would watch this clip of Carl. So he's meeting with this sadhu who was performing a devotional act where he had lifted up his arm and he was just holding it there for the rest of his life. And his arm was becoming all withered and desiccated because he just wasn't using it. And so Carl had a hard time understanding that. And then later they're interviewing him in his hotel room, and he's like, well, that just seems like a good excuse to get out of doing the dishes now, doesn't it? Because it's like, oh, sorry, honey, can't help you. My arm. Anyway, that was his response.
Yeah, there was actually a lot of sadhus like that. They call them fakirs, not fakirs, Fakirs, and they're the ones that lay on the nail beds, and they do things like tie bricks to their penises or genitals, and I did actually see somebody walk around with his arm up in the air, all atrophied. But the incredible thing was his nails were growing through his hand, so his fingernails were coming out the back of his hand.
Wow.
So they completely atrophy, and people standing on one leg. Many, standing on one leg to prove their devotion to Shiva. They're usually Shivites, because Shiva's kind of like the fiery one, and people have to really do extreme things to prove their devotion, apparently, according to some of the sadhus. But it was interesting walking around. People whipping themselves and all sorts of crazy stuff. But I felt so blessed to be in this incredible, Cirque du Soleil, spiritual Cirque du Soleil. Yeah, it just blew my mind.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a far cry from growing up in London and sort of traditional Christian orthodoxy. A very, very different world.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but I'd carry on with that story a bit, because I did write about this in the book, where I took photographs, because it was so sort of incredible, people and temples behind me, and it was sometimes me in the foreground, and I developed, after I'd been there a few weeks at the Kumbh Mela, and I saw a picture of myself, and I saw the same sort of like sad expression, and the same person looking back at me. And I'd only been gone a month at that point, but I had hoped that I'd see some change, but I didn't. I saw the same person. I was like, oh crap, nothing's changing. I got to do something. I did have panic in that moment. I was like, oh my God, this isn't working, even though it had been a short time. And then Amantane, who is my spirit guide, he told me his name, Amantane, and he sort of would guide me in different ways, and still does. And he said to me, you need to look inside yourself, Alan. You need to, I know the external environment is changing, but the internal environment needs to change. But I don't know how to do that. How do I do that, Amantane? He said, well, you need to go to a small Indian village, and you need to spend 3 months there. And you need to be with yourself, and you need to be, in a completely alien environment where you're not known, you're anonymous, and that's really going to help you. And one of the things I felt that would help me with is the fact that I was very self-conscious, and I kind as a people pleaser, I did things, to get a reaction from other people. I was always a joker. I always wanted to make people laugh and things like that. And I knew that being on my own in a village would probably be a good thing, even though it sounded really scary. So I did find a village. I found a village in Kashmir, right in the north of India, that didn't experience the monsoon. And I spent 3 months in a little village living above a cattle shed that belonged to a family who was introduced to me by somebody I met on a bus. And so I was there, learned the language. I started learning Kashmiri every day. I studied for hours, and fishing on the lake. It was next to a lake, and really living a quiet life. But the interesting thing is that when I walked in the village, I'd have a posse of people behind me, like the Pied Piper. So even if I went out of my room, I couldn't really get away. I was like surrounded by people just looking at me all the time and pointing. But I found it amusing. They used to call me Sahib. Oh, Sahib, come Sahib. They speak in Kashmiri. Sahib, Sahib. And that means great man. And it's what they used to call the British, I guess, Sahib. Right. And so I was like, well, I don't feel great. Don't stop calling me Sahib. But they carried on calling me Sahib. So I thought I'd better live up to that. And so I started to really explore how to live a more sort of, open-hearted sort of life. And here I am today, 40 years later, or nearly 4 years later, happy and haven't been depressed for 35 years.
Yeah. Well, I want to get back into the story, but first I would just like to ask you a question that's kind of in my interest in phenomenology. I'm always interested in the phenomenon that takes place. So you've mentioned a few times about this spirit guide, Amantane?
Amantane. Yeah.
Amantane. Sorry, I had the intonation wrong, but Amantane, and describing it as a voice that you heard. So this is a phenomenon that happens, right? It exists out there in reality. People hear voices. Yeah. And I think there's definitely a distinction between, like, I'm going insane and hearing voices and they're telling me to do god-awful shit and terrible things to people, versus you're getting life advice. But I'm always interested in what that experience is like. And for example, I have lots of conversations about their experiences. I do a lot of integration work with people, and it's quite common, especially working with psychedelics. People mention hearing voices, receiving guidance and wisdom. And there's a few different ways where that shows up, where people, sometimes they say, well, it sounded like my voice, but had a different quality to it, or it didn't sound at all like my voice. Or sometimes for women, they say it's a male voice, or sometimes for men, they say it's a female voice. And a lot of people also report that when they hear an internal voice, particularly giving guidance like this, that it might be a bit more formal and authoritative sounding. So I'm curious, for you, how would you describe the experience of that voice? How did you perceive it and receive it when you first started hearing that?
Yeah, well, it did come completely out of the blue. As I said, I'd never had that experience before, even though I did pray a lot. I kind of recognized my internal voice as being one that was very self-critical, which is kind of the go-to for people that are depressed. And I did question that. I did question, was this my higher self? Is this my higher self talking? And the voice was very different to mine. It had much stronger. I tend to be quite a soft speaker, and my manner is quite soft and mellow. And this voice was kind of like a bit more sort of warrior-like. And I had to listen. That's why when I first heard it, it caught my attention, but not just because it was an unusual experience or phenomenon, but because it was a voice that was unlike what would have been my own. And I did question, was this an angel? But my impressive angel, that it would probably be more sort of lilting type of voice, and not quite so strong. And I do recognize now that it is a warrior voice. And fortunately, because of ayahuasca, I got to meet him. And he is a warrior. But yeah, for the first sort of few months, I was wondering, well, is this actually just me? But I didn't have the sort of course, my higher self is a whole different animal, but I didn't feel that I had that sort of information. I didn't feel that I had the capacity to, without guidance, to look at myself in a deeper, more loving, more sort of self-referential way. So it was the fact it wasn't just speaking to me, he was actually showing me what I needed to do, and which, of course, the higher self can do as well. But I kind of dismissed that fairly quickly because he seemed out of me. He didn't seem like he was something that came from my own experience, worldly experience. And so the fact that he seemed a foreign type of intelligence, and then, as I say, I met him in ayahuasca ceremony. In a way, it didn't really matter, to be honest with you. He was giving me salient, very, loving and intelligent and wise advice. So I didn't really sort of like make too big a deal about where it came from. But I recognise that he is actually a spirit guide, and I've recognised that for a long time.
Yeah. So when this first occurred, I don't remember if you mentioned this in the book or not, but did you share that experience with anyone? Did you say, hey, this voice told me, like, go to India?
Well, put it this way, my sisters and my mother read the book, and they didn't even know that I was suicidal. So that's the sort of family I grew up in. The first time they ever heard that I was depressed and suicidal was when they read the book.
Wow.
And I also, I came from a family that kind of kept them, their sort of feelings to themselves. My father was, seriously depressed. He never spoke about his feelings. He was my role model, and I sort of followed on from him, and even becoming depressed probably because of the great example that he showed me. But yeah, we didn't really speak. In fact, I had other experiences prior to that where I took LSD from the age of 17, and had these incredibly powerful experiences. I don't know if you'd call them mystical, but they were powerful. And I took them regularly with friends and just as a recreational sort of pursuit. And then when I was about 22, I decided I was going to stop because I was becoming more depressed. I was becoming much more isolated, and I shut myself away a lot. And so I stopped taking the LSD and swore I'd never take another hallucinogenic in my life at that point, which is obviously a laugh, isn't it, considering I've been drinking ayahuasca for 20 years. But I didn't touch that LSD until last year, so I did not take LSD for many, many decades. But I used to, after taking the LSD, I used to have what is commonly known as like flashbacks, or at least I thought they were flashbacks, where the medicine sort of becomes activated in you again, and you start having visionary experiences. And I realised it actually wasn't a flashback; it was a new experience. The LSD had showed me a portal into another dimension, allowed me to access this like incredible realms that were, even different to the LSD, because they involved me sort of like flying through the cosmos and, bumping into strange animals and anthropomorphic forms that I hadn't really had in LSD. So I could do it at will. I knew what, I was shown how to do it at will in a way, which is just to clench my eyelids really tight and hold my breath and push through the doorway. And I could do it at will, and I could come out of it at will. And, you could even describe it like a bliss state or mental orgasm or something like that. But it could go as long as I wanted, and I could come out of it whenever I wanted. And I never told anybody about that either. And I just thought that was meditation, I wasn't trained in meditation, being Catholic and or other worldly sort of phenomena. But I just thought it was meditation. I never told anybody about that. I thought just everybody else was doing it as well.
Oh, yeah. So you never got into conversation with the monks or nuns about any of that, or the priests?
Oh, no. Yeah. No, there's only so many things you could talk about with them.
Yeah. But it sounds like from your dad, from your family situation, that you became the typical Brit, right? With the keep calm, carry on, stiff upper lip, all that kind of.
That's me right there. Yeah. That's how I used to be, put it that way. Yeah, never talk about my feelings, never talk if I was. I tried, and I wasn't met with sort of much encouragement, so I just thought it's pointless, So I didn't even talk with my sisters about it. They didn't talk to me about their feelings or what was going on in their lives. four sisters, I kind of kept myself isolated, all that female energy. So I was quite a bit of a loner anyway in the house.
Yeah. So then, just to get back to your story, that you mentioned that then it was that time in that Kashmir village that you started to really understand what it meant to live from your heart. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? And I'm curious, did you experience, like a lot of people as they go through these transformations, they start unloading those repressed energies and emotions, and they have to go through periods of crying and laughing and releasing all of that. Was that part of your experience living in the village?
To some degree, I wasn't a crier. I was, I feel I was like highly spiritually sensitive. So I had, my feelings were significant around that period. I was alone. I shut myself in my room quite a lot because I didn't want to be the Pied Piper in the village, being followed by everybody. Then I had a dugout canoe that I would row on the lake and fish, and I'd spend my days out there a lot of the time fishing and studying Kashmiri, and then I could lift my head up and there'd be like 6 dugout canoes around me, sort of like with people just looking at me in the middle of the lake. I didn't have any guidance other than Amantha. He encouraged me to journal. That's not something that I had ever done before. It's not really a British thing, back in the 60s. And so I started journaling, and I started making heading about what I wanted, different things like about perseverance and creativity and sort of courage and things like that, and sort of would make notes of it and wrote daily about the feelings that I was having and people that I met and experiences I had. So that was new. I was actually starting to, in a way, verbalize it through the writing about what I felt about myself, and started to recognize that I needed to offer myself words of encouragement and words of support and love. And that's something that that wasn't around in the culture that I was raised in. Like people didn't really talk about love or self-love. Just what the Beatles did, but that was just something the Beatles did. It wasn't something that happened in my little town in South London. So I started to really explore that. I knew it was important and started meditating. I even wore the clothes, the local clothes, Kashmiri clothes, and the slippers. They kind of looked like pajamas for the men, and I wore them. I had some made for me. So I was really, what I wanted to do is I really wanted to immerse myself in this culture, to step out of my usual frame of reference, conditioned, way of being, and to sort of dress in their clothes. I'm going to get sort of ridiculed and things like that. And I was just like, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to sort of like try to be as uncomfortable in some ways with myself in certain situations, like just stepping out of that comfort zone that I had. It comforted me, and part of that comfort zone was ironically depression. And because depression, I recognized, was something that I was addicted to, that allowed me to stay small, to stay hidden, to not be out there sort of like in the world and really living to the fullest capacity I could. And here I was in this village, kind of trying to undo that, destructure it. I wouldn't have used that word at the time, but now I see that that's what I was doing. And I was guided. There definitely was a higher self-guidance from that, as well as my spirit guide. And so I did change my life fundamentally. Yeah. And I was studying Kashmiri. I studied French at school, but this language that was so alien. I was just really proud of myself, and I wasn't proud of myself that often. So that really helped to motivate me.
Yeah, and I would just want to emphasize and highlight what you just shared there about how that intentionally moving yourself into discomfort was a major part of the healing catalyst, because I think this is something that a lot of people who suffer from depression or anxiety or, just recurrent thoughts of lack of self-worth or lack of self-love, where that habit itself, even though that's not positive, it still is comforting because it continually reinforces your story that you're not good enough, that you're not worthy, and then gives you an excuse to not be happy and to not try and to stay in that paradoxical comfort zone of being unhappy. And so it's by intentionally challenging that and putting yourself into a situation where you couldn't just fall back into those old patterns really is what helping to change that look on your face that you mentioned when you saw the photograph of yourself at the Kumbh Mela, that the still look of the depression. And
exactly, yeah.
So when did you start to smile? Like genuinely, like really smile?
I started to smile on that journey, definitely. You know, just one other thing that came up when you were talking is that one of the things that I did when the Mantini said, you know, this is what you need to do. You need to go on a journey for 18 months. I said yes. I remember saying that, silently to myself, yes. And I realized that yes was a clear choice.
Yeah.
And so one thing that I recognize that if people want to change their life, and certainly it's been a helpful awareness as doing the work that I do now, that if you're not making a clear choice, you're not willing to change. You still want to stay stuck in the patterns that you've become familiar with at some level are keeping you comfortable. And so that yes that I gave was a 10 out of 10. Because I did leave England, I left and I travelled for 18 months, and that was so scary for me, you know, because I'd never really travelled before. But I said yes, and I followed through. And if you give a 10 out of 10 yes, it requires a 10 out of 10 follow through. And if you only give a 8 out of 10 yes, you're not committed enough, and chances are that you're going to talk yourself out of following through. So, you know, that was something that I continued to say is yes. If yes was appropriate and no if no was appropriate, and that's kind of setting clear boundaries, and I set them with myself. And it's like, Alan, this is your shot. This is your shot. You know, you can do this, brother. You know,
yeah.
And I am prepared 100% to do what is required to allow you to. First of all, it was just to not be depressed, but then it became to live an exceptional life.
Yeah, yeah. And something that I like about the story that you're sharing here now and also in the book is that you do have this pivotal moment. And for anyone who's had a moment like that, I'm sure that they can identify with, you know, whatever the source was, whether it's interior or exterior, but when they found like, it's really going to be up to me. If I want to change my life, it's going to be up to me and I need to say yes to that. But that doesn't mean that things instantaneously get better or that things just magically suddenly, I said yes, so now everything is turning up roses, but it takes work and commitment and that continued returning to the yes and say, no, I'm going to do this. I am doing it. And I'm going to take the next step and the next step and the next step. And that's how you build a different life for yourself.
Yeah, and one of the other, that's absolutely right. And one of the other things that I also experienced from that pivotal moment is that I recognized that when I said yes, that I actually had a choice to say yes. I didn't know that I had a choice prior to that. You know, I was raised Catholic, and that my depression was as a result of being a sinner. You know, that's what you're taught, isn't it?
Right.
And so I didn't think there was a way out of it for me. So that's why I wanted to die, because it's only because of the intervention of a Mantini I knew that there was another choice for me. And so I've continued to recognize that I am master of my own destiny, that actions have consequences, that if something isn't going right for me in my life, look at it, change aspects of my life that will help to support, you know, a shift in you know, the outcome. And that's how I help clients with that, you know, help them to really see that you are sovereign. You have to hold accountability for your life. I didn't actually know that at the age of 28, I didn't know that I had that choice. Yeah.
So then continuing on with the story, I'm just looking at, so I've got your book right over here to the side. I know that what comes next eventually is that you do end up back in England and then finding that this isn't the place for me. So I'm curious what you would share about that return. And this is part of the hero's journey, right? That you go out, you discover yourself, you discover your gifts, you return home, but then maybe home isn't what you thought it was, or maybe that's not where you want to be your home.
Exactly, yeah. Well, yeah, 18 months of traveling around Asia. I had some incredible experiences. Kumbh Mela being one of them, but there were many incredible experiences. And I was worried about going back home. In fact, I was more worried about going back to England than I was about leaving in the first place. And I was really worried about that. So, I arrived back in England. I actually didn't go straight back to my hometown. I just went to Brighton or somewhere on the South Coast to spend a few days just to reintegrate a bit. And I can tell you a funny story about that. I arrived at the train station and I went to the tourist office there to find out whether there was not Airbnb, just a bed and breakfast. And there was this young guy in there. He said, "Oh, I can take you there. I know where they are." And he was just happened to be in there. And he took there and he's telling his story about how he joined the Foreign Legion and how he'd been stuck in some sort of like oasis in the middle of the Sahara and surrounded by the rebels. And prior to that, he said that he couldn't eat meat because he would die from salmonella. And he was telling me a story, and he said, "I said, well, how did you survive?" Because he said he got split up from his troop, and he said there was just two of them. One of them, his ally got killed. And I said, "Well, how did you survive?" He said, "Oh, I ate him." And I said, "I thought you said the doctor said you'd die if you ate meat." He said, "Oh, not human meat." I was like, "Oh, he told you that, did he?" But I was just like, thank God I met somebody, that I can really relate to, that I wasn't sort of in that stuck-up British environment. The first person I met back in England was this dude, and I was just like, thank you so much, brother. He didn't know why I was thanking him, but I was just so grateful that was my sort of entry, and I thought, I can do this, Yeah, so I went back home and visit my family and stayed with one of my sisters. And the irony of it is that, I told you we were a family that didn't sort of really speak about feelings. I realised then that I lived in a culture where people didn't ask questions. And so I had all these incredible experiences, and I'd sort of meet some of my friends and they'd just be talking about soccer, like the football team or, girls or something like that.
Yeah.
Not sort of tell us something about your trip, so what was the pivotal moment on your trip? And I was like, because when you have an experience like that, you want to share it, right? Because to keep it alive. And I found I didn't have that. And I kind of just slip it into conversations, but it wasn't because I was asked about it. I thought, this is weird, and so actually I decided I need to find different friends, and so I did. I gave up. I did a bit of construction for money, but I started selling antiques and collectibles in street markets in London, and I met sort of fringe people there, because people that work in those markets to make a living are sort of fringe. They don't want to be part of working for the man type of environment. So that they were more like me in many ways, sort of more deep thinkers, and just would ask a lot of questions, and actually we talk about Buddhism and different things that I got interested in. And I didn't know any Buddhists prior to that. So it was nice. It was nice to actually meet people, kindred spirits.
Yeah. So I know I'm jumping ahead just a little bit here, but then how did ayahuasca come into the picture?
Before ayahuasca, I'll talk about shamanism. I moved to San Francisco. I traveled after England. I stayed about a year in England, saving money, working a lot, and I decided to travel around South America. It was kind of in my blood at that point. I spent a year traveling around South America. The first country was Peru, actually, and I visited Peru twice on that year. First time I couldn't speak any Spanish, not hardly a word. I was a strict vegetarian. I didn't eat any meat or drink alcohol. So it was quite hard for me. I should have learned Spanish, of course, to be in South America, which is the land of meat, not speaking Spanish. So the first phrase I learned word I learned was vegetariano. And that didn't get me far because they didn't really understand it. But anyway, that's another story. But I survived on eggs and rice for a year. But I ended up in San Francisco after that trip. I wanted to carry on traveling because of what I had already said about England. I knew I just didn't want to go. I didn't want to live back there. I couldn't live back there. So I wanted to earn money to carry on traveling, or maybe go and live in Holland or somewhere like that. So people said, "Oh, why don't you go to San Francisco in the US?" And I had just enough money to get me there. So I flew to San Francisco, not knowing anybody. But San Francisco being San Francisco, I met people pretty quickly, and I had a good Buddhist community fairly quickly. I was still doing this other, in my meditation, my sort of specialized meditation that I was doing. And I went to see somebody who I thought was a hypnotist, because what I was noticing is that my Buddhist meditation, it kind of plateaued and I wasn't really able to get out of it. So I went to see a hypnotherapist to help me get over my meditation block. And I said, well, I do this other thing, is it, I've been told that's not meditation, other thing. She said, tell me about it. She said, oh, that's shamanic journeying. And I was like, oh, it's a thing? She said, yeah, it's shamanic journeying. She said, coincidentally, she taught classes. And it wasn't coincidental, of course, but I started taking classes from her and realised, wow, I can really do this. I could just jump in there and sort of follow the instructions really well, have incredible experiences. So I kind of moved more into shamanism than I did, moved a bit away from Buddhism, because I found the meditations were more my style. The journeying was more my style than the single-pointed analytical meditations of Buddhism. And so I started exploring it, and it just so happened that the Bay Area was where Michael Harner lived. Michael Harner, have you heard of him?
Michael Harner Way of the Shaman. Yeah,
Way of the Shaman. Yeah, amazing book. He lived there, and so he did a lot of classes. So I started doing classes with him, and so got really good training with him at some levels. And I was really into shamanism, but I was only doing it out of curiosity. I wasn't doing it to do healing work. At the same time, I'd started volunteering at a hospice, the Zen Hospice Project in San Francisco. I wanted to give back to the gay community. In that time that I was befriended, my boss was gay, and I had a lot of gay friends. I wanted to give back, so I started in this hospice. And I think that the combination of shamanism and the hospice work moved me sort of more towards being a healer. But I still wasn't actively doing it. But me and my first wife, we decided that we wanted to leave the US. We were working a lot, and we wanted to learn another language. So we decided to go to Peru, that I had visited twice before. Yeah. We went to Peru to explore, and do volunteer work. I was working in an old folks home. She was working in a home for disabled children, run by nuns, Catholic nuns. But anyway, while I was in Peru, I thought, well, I'll explore Peruvian shamanism. And so I found a shaman, ayahuasquero. I was guided to him, and I started drinking ayahuasca, and the rest is history. Yeah. It's because of that.
Yeah, so it's a bit of the opposite journey of Michael Harner. So he shares in his book, and I'm sure some of my audience is familiar with that, but it's a bit of an old book by now. That's kind of like the old school of early writings about shamanism in the West. And so Michael Harner, I believe he was an anthropology student, and that he ended up drinking ayahuasca, learned about shamanism, and then developed his practices of what he called core shamanism, which was mainly based on the idea that by rapid drumming beats, you can help propel consciousness into altered states. And that was kind of packaged for Western consumption in the sense of we can do our drumming, we can go into shamanic states and participate in shamanic healing, and then we don't need to use the entheogens and psychedelics. But then your own story is you were doing that. Well, first you were spontaneous with your own ability, then got onto the shamanic drumming and the core shamanism of Michael Harner, and then got to the ayahuasca. I'm curious, did you have any, because sometimes what we see is people say, well, you should just be able to do it on your own and you shouldn't have to use the entheogens. And Michael Harner said we can do it without. So why would you do that? So did you have any internal conflict around whoa, but Michael said we just do the drumming and we shouldn't drink the substances. Did you have any experience like that, or were you just
Yeah. No, because Michael Harner didn't actually say that it was verboten, that you couldn't do it.
Right.
He part of his training was that he went around the world looking at different shamanic traditions. As you say, he started in Ecuador with the Jivaro, the Shuar people, where he had that ayahuasca experience. But he saw that actually probably 90% of shamanic traditions in the world use something called a sonic drive, which is a drum or a rattle or Tibetan bowls or something like that. So it actually is more common that people use the sound rather than the hallucinogens or entheogens. So it's not like you said, no, you can't do it. It's like, in Christianity, you have to do it this way,
Right.
In shamanism, for the most part, there isn't that, although some teachers could say you have to follow me and nobody else, but that's not real shamanism, So he was the one Michael was the one that introduced me to ayahuasca because of his book. So I hadn't, of course there was talk about it in the shamanic circles, but I actually hadn't known anybody that had drunk ayahuasca when I went down to Peru. And so I just thought, well, I want to be I'm adventurous, I'm going to be the one to drink it. And there was never any conflict. And, my own shamanic journey and the spontaneous journey didn't involve any sound. I was just able to, to go into it whenever, like lying in the park or something, just go into that state. But I was introduced to ayahuasca. I was very lucky that I met the man that I did, and would sit with him. I went for a particular reason. I just got tinnitus before I went to Peru, and it was kind of freaking me out. I wondered if he could help me with that. And so that I did actually have a motive for going, but then it became more of an exploration into that world.
Yeah. So you write about some of your early experiences, and certainly some of them are quite impactful. And one of the things that I appreciate that you mentioned in the book is that you do say that not every time you drink ayahuasca is going to be mind-blowing, opening up the universe. There's a lot of variation, and that it's not necessarily about chasing those experiences, but yet you've also had some very big experiences. And so just like to invite you of what you'd like to share there.
Yeah. So, I wasn't prepared for what to expect. I didn't read anything about it. I didn't diet or anything. I just showed up at this guy's door. It's like, speaking of cattle sheds, it was like a cattle shed, outside of Cusco. It was a sort of dodgy area, and I just went with this woman that I barely knew that took me there. And so the environment was not comfortable. They talk about set and setting being important. The setting wasn't, let's say, very comforting, but the set was amazing because it was with this guy, Maestro Pedro. That's all I only know him as Maestro Pedro. And so I just drank ayahuasca, and I was there the first night I was there, and I was there with a couple of young Peruvians, and we were sitting there, and at some point, we can't do this, and so they left, or they said, they just thought, aren't you scared? And I was like, actually, I'm not really scared. I didn't know what I was getting into. So it was probably a good thing.
Should I be scared? Or?
Yeah, exactly. And they left, and then a couple of people showed up. So I drank this medicine. I think that all my years of shamanic work and my own sort of journey work was helpful because I got into the medicine, the ayahuasca, really quickly. It came on really quickly, and the experiences were incredible. But I was sort of, in a way, familiar with some of the experiences I was having. It didn't sort of frighten me at all, So it allowed me to go deeper and deeper into the journey. So I had like mind-blowing journeys, every single one when I was in, and I didn't know how I was going to benefit from them, but they were just like so unworldly and mystical. I had deep mystical experiences where I left feeling different. I didn't know why, but there was just knowing that there's more to my life than I'd ever realized before. And that I was divine. I was one of the part of the great mystery, and so I just explored it. And my wife at the time, she actually did join me on 2 occasions. She never had any experience. She'd never taken a hallucinogenic in her life. She was quite close to it, but at that point I realized, so it's not the same for everybody.
Yeah.
And I'd sort of been to Venus and back, and she didn't have anything. So I at that point I realized that ayahuasca wasn't like a one size fits all. And then I came back to the US after that. Was very, very intrigued to continue.
Yeah. So at this point in your story, I mean, you've come a long way since that depressed young adult in London. And, there's chapter 9 here of your book is meeting God. And you just touched on that a little bit of that mystical sense of connection and oneness and being part of the divine. Did this, you had already been spiritually transforming But did these experiences, it sounds like they were able to land rather naturally within you at this point, even though, as you described, they were very mind-blowing. So you'd come a long way from that Catholic upbringing, but was there any residue of Catholicism that was ever creep in and was like, oh, this is something other than how you're receiving it or appreciating it, or has that had been fully evacuated by that point?
Yeah, that had been expunged. That side of things about the doctrine of Christianity was like, forget that stuff. I was working with the Christian nuns in Peru, as I mentioned, in the old folks' home, and they were just the most loving people. They were so unlike what I was used to experiencing, and they were just the most heart-centered, loving people that were looking after the elderly, alone, abandoned elderly. That's the name of the old folks' home, abandoned poor, and they were just so loving. And you didn't have to be Catholic or go to mass, anything like that, to be accepted there. So I just saw a different side of Christianity than what I experienced myself. But I'd already, as I said, expunged a lot of the sort of doctrine. But that doesn't mean that I'd let go of all the conditioning. I recognise I was holding on to some of the conditioning. I didn't feel that I was a sinner any longer. I wasn't depressed any longer. I did a lot of shame and guilt. And I knew that came from my Christian upbringing. So that was something that I have sort of continued to work on. It's not to the point where it affects my mental states too badly, but I'm aware that I react in ways, or I did used to react in ways that were, I'd hold sort of like tension around it, or self-criticism around sort of being a particular way, or having acted in a particular manner. So I knew that even though I let go of the doctrine, the conditioning, which runs so deep, was still having a little, not as prevalent or as prominent an impact on me as when I was younger, but it definitely was still there, sort of. And it was something that I looked at with ayahuasca and work with.
Yeah. It's pretty classic Catholic recovery process of dealing with the deeply, deeply ingrained shame and guilt.
Oh, yeah. Oh boy. But fortunately, I have no, thanks to the nuns, I have no ill will to Catholicism per se. The nuns at my high school and grade school were all nice people. It's just the monks were a little bit harsh in high school. But I had no hard feelings towards Christianity as a sort of spiritual sort of practice, but it's just all the other bullshit, that's so unnecessary.
Yeah. So then when did things transition into actually pursuing ayahuasca with the intention of learning how to serve, how to heal, how to work with others with the medicine? Yeah.
It was actually thanks to hospice. I was away from hospice for 6 months. At that point, I'd already been volunteering for 12 years. And it wasn't part of my spiritual practice. I was sitting the first night I went back, it was like a week after I got back from Peru, and I didn't know what to do with those experiences that I had, the ayahuasca experience. Again, there was nobody that I knew that had drunk. I didn't really have anybody to talk to about it. Fortunately, at that time I was about in my mid-40s, so I was sort of had life experience and my Buddhist practice and my shamanic practice. So I was pretty solid, I think, spiritually. So I didn't really need integration in a way that a lot of people would need it in their sort of like 20s and early 30s or something. I would had as sort of quite a lot of life experience, and I was sitting at the bedside of somebody. I can't remember if he died when I sat down, whether he was already dead. I can't remember that detail. But anyway, I pulled the curtain around the bed. He was on a hospital ward. Wanted just a little bit of privacy there. And I, for the first time ever in my life, I saw his either his spirit or his life force leave his body. And it was just like smoke coming out of his mouth and his ears and his nose. And I was like looking at it, I was like, wow, am I making this up? But thanks to all my shamanic practices, it's like, well, you're making everything up, so don't worry about it, just sort of carry on looking, and exploring what's happening. But then I just said to myself, something's different, isn't it? And at that point, Amantane said, yes, you're a healer, and this is the path for the rest of your life. Those are the exact words. And he said it just like that. Yes, you are a healer, and this is your path for the rest of your life. And I went, yes. 10 out of 10. And I went home and I told my wife what happened. And she said, you should probably go back to Peru. And I was like, wow, that's amazing that she would say something like that. But I realised that that's what I needed to do. Because I didn't know how to do healing work. I'd done shamanic journeying, but I didn't really know how to do it. So I just thought, he said, you are a healer. He didn't say you're going to train and do all these apprentices and do all this and that and go down to Peru and for 5 years. And no, he said, you are a healer. So I was like, okay. So I just started calling friends up and say, I'm a healer. Would you like some healing work? And they'd come round, and I do, shake my rattle and kind of replicate what they were doing in the ayahuasca, Maestro Pedro's doing in the ayahuasca ceremonies. I do shamanic journeying and stuff like that. And people would sort of go, oh my God, what did you just do? I was like, I have no idea. But they just, no, it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Well, I knew the experience was amazing. I could sense that, but I didn't know that the aftermath would be amazing. So I knew that I had to start doing training, and ayahuasca was my obvious teacher. So I started to go to Peru sort of fairly regularly, attend ayahuasca retreats, and learn more about shamanic healing through the shamanic circle that I was in. So it was that, it's just like, oh my God, I get these like moments. This is what you do. This is what you do. You've got to do this. And I was yes, I get it. Because Amantane's not going to put me wrong. He never has. And so I was lucky that I had that ally that was steering me. And of course, he knew I was a healer when he first met me. When I was 28, sitting on the floor in my apartment in South London. He obviously knew that, but I didn't know that. And he was kind of like guiding me and steering me towards that path. And then he revealed to me when I was ready to hear it.
Yeah, when you discovered it yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he just said, okay, this is the final piece.
Yeah. So then it was after that you came into my relative neck of the woods up in Mount Shasta?
Yeah. No, it wasn't after that immediately. I stayed married for a few years after that, and I'd be going to Peru and doing different trainings. And I actually in Peru one time I met a young woman from San Francisco, so we became friends. I was living in San Francisco, as I mentioned, and we started just drinking ayahuasca with a group of different friends, mutual friends. So we just bring ayahuasca back from Peru and drink with a group of friends and start learning how to do this work, start learning the songs. But I did a lot of the training on my own. Just I go away for a few days, a week at a time, and just drink sort of heroic doses of ayahuasca. And I put myself through my paces. Let me tell you. And she kicked my butt, and she would pretty much every time say this. When it'd be night after night. She'd say, "Can I swear? Is that okay to swear?" Yeah.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah. She said, "Who the fuck do you think you are? Who the fuck?" It's like she'd already given me this bitch slap. You have to learn. I'm not going to go soft on you. And who the fuck do you want? And that was just like to just keep me humble, and just through all the tears and the snot, I would just like pick myself up, go into I might be sitting on the toilet, go into the main space and just start ceremony. I'd be doing I'd be offering full ceremonies for hours as though there was a room full of people, and it was just me, and that would be a lot of the training that I did was actually on my own. And then I started moving outside that circle of friends that I mentioned and sort of reaching out to other people. But my marriage broke down. Our paths were just very different, obviously, at that point. And that was when I part of the reason my marriage broke down, because I wanted to leave San Francisco. I couldn't be in a city anymore. This path, my path meant I had to be in sort of in a more open area, and of California, and chose Mount Shasta. I used to go to Mount Shasta with my teacher, Oscar Miro Quesada, who's an amazing Peruvian Camasca curandero, shaman, incredible guy. And so I used to sort of not lead retreats. I used to coordinate his retreats up in Mount Shasta, and so I got to know it a bit. And I decided I'm going to move there, and I gave up a thriving. I was like so busy in the Bay Area. I was teaching Reiki and teaching shamanism and doing ayahuasca ceremonies. I had an office in Oakland, and I had like one after the other. I was, a thriving business. And I gave it all up. It's like, here we go again, and moved up to Mount Shasta to open a retreat center. Yeah, one of the things in California, because ayahuasca isn't legal, is finding the space to do it is quite a challenge. And so I wanted to have my own space, and I found that in Mount Shasta. And so we would lead smaller ceremonies there. They tended to be, rather than 20 plus people, as I was doing around the Bay Area, it was a maximum of 10. Yeah. And they had to know each other. So one person would kind of arrange it and bring all their sort of friends. And so that was a lot easier to deal with.
Yeah. So for the listening audience who maybe is not familiar with the geology and geography of Northern California, so I am in Ashland, Oregon, which is just over the border from Northern California. We've got the Siskiyou Mountains and the Siskiyou Pass. And from where I am, I cannot see Mount Shasta. But if I just get up high enough, right, just go up in elevation, and I mean like physically get up high enough, then we can look down into California. And like if you go up on Mount Ashland, Mount Shasta is very clearly visible just over there. And then my parents, my dad lives in Chico, California. My mom lives in Marysville. And on a clear day, that's further down into California, but that's a little bit about the limit. Like where my mom lives in Marysville is if you get a clear shot north, you can just see Mount Shasta peeking up a little white triangle way up north. And then, if I could just drive that way, I'll eventually get to Ashland and get to Oregon. And it's a very, very beautiful volcano. It's not an active volcano at the moment, but like many of the mountains in the Cascades, it is a volcano and potentially could erupt anytime. But it's literally the high point in our area. It's the dominant mountain in Northern California and Southern Oregon. And we all love Mount Shasta. And there's beautiful lakes and rivers. If you've never visited Northern California and Mount Shasta, for anybody listening, I recommend you go. It's stunning. It's beautiful. And it's definitely a great place. And it attracts a lot of interesting characters doing lots of interesting things.
Lots of interesting ones, yeah. A lot of woo-woo as well as sort of solid. Yeah, but it's a just stunningly beautiful place, yeah, and I loved living there. I only moved down to Ecuador because I was guided to do so, even though I loved living there.
Yeah.
No regrets about it.
How many years were you in the Mount Shasta region?
7 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, 7 years. Yeah, by the end it was thriving practice, and I kind of have 7 year spans, and I hope I stay down here longer than 7 years. I don't think I can start all over again, because you have to, when you pick up, move into a totally different area, you have to start all over again, really. So that's what we've done.
Yeah, it's quite a bit. So facilitating, an underground facilitator in the United States. How did you deal with the anxieties and concerns about, well, what if the authorities decide they're going to crack down on ayahuasca? And I mean, there's a lot of ayahuasca served in this area, Northern California, Southern Oregon. There's a lot of it, but other than the Santo Daime Church, it's all illegal, and people have to be underground. So you've got to be a bit circumspect about who you share it with and how you operate, which is very different than say in Ecuador, where it's part of life. So how was that for you as an underground facilitator?
Yeah, I mean, it's an issue. Certainly when I started leading ceremonies, it wasn't that well known. It wasn't popular. And so I was, one of the fringe people that was doing it. You couldn't advertise, obviously. You have to, be word of mouth, and sort of like, okay, you can't just sort of pass this on to your friends. You have to sort of make an introduction or something like that. Don't just pass on the information. So we did that. I have Graham Hancock's a friend of mine. He mentioned me in a podcast or something like that, and suddenly the phone started ringing
right
off the hook, and I was like, oh God, he called me up and said, oh, I think I made a mistake. And I said, oh, you got to take that down because, it's too risky. So he did, he had the people take it down. But yeah, so that's unfortunate because I could have sold out every retreat pretty quickly, So I had to, just be circumspect. Even my neighbours didn't know what I was doing up in Mount Shasta. They thought I was doing Reiki retreats.
Yeah. So how did you go about securing your ayahuasca?
I would have it shipped from Peru or Brazil.
Oh, did you ever have any issues with that, like it getting confiscated through customs, or it just came through?
Yeah, I think it came through every time, apart from one time. I would bring it through, from on the plane as well. At one point, they stopped importing, they stopped exporting liquids from Peru. I think it was under the duress of the DEA, the American DEA, and so it was impossible to get medicine from Peru. So I found a contact from the Santo Daime in Brazil, so they didn't have a red flag from Brazil. So I started getting it from Brazil. Unfortunately, it was like the best medicine I've ever drunk. It's just the most incredible medicine. So in a way, it was lucky that I found them. But here, Ecuador, it's just a lot easier. I don't have to worry about it. I never really worried about it. I had one person threaten me once. And two people threatened me once. I'm going to tell the authorities. And when somebody says something to me like that, I don't sort of like, oh, please don't. It's just like, don't you fucking try it. It's got to be, you got to be the warrior. Don't you ever dare. Don't you ever dare threaten me. And so they didn't do anything, So, it's I'm happy to hear that it's sort of been decriminalized in some areas and also in Oregon. I don't know. Does that mean that it's openly practiced in Oregon?
Well, no. So we had decriminalization for a short period of time, and then that has now been undone. So we are no longer a decriminalized state, but just in terms of legal access, there are the various Santo Daime points or churches. So that was back in 2008 and 2009. The local church here in Ashland, the Church of the Holy Light of the Queen, they took the federal government to court and sued them for their religious freedom and claimed that as the Santo Daime is a church, it is a religion that comes from Brazil. And within that court case, the lawyers, they would only refer to the daime as daime because they would say, well, ayahuasca, it's the same drink, but that is a shamanic practice, and shamanic practice is just a cultural tradition and is not subject to religious freedom protections. So that is where the law currently stands. So it's an interesting situation because here in Southern Oregon, there's lots of people who serve ayahuasca. All of that is still 100% thoroughly illegal, but you can go to the Santo Daime Church and you can drink ayahuasca there, and that is a religiously protected constitutional right and freedom.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it is an issue. I know that I've sort of asked around, of course, it's a little bit of a grey area in terms of what the feds do, but I feel that the only time that there's any ever a problem is when somebody gets hurt.
Yeah.
Other than that, they've got bigger fish to fry.
Yeah, I've never known of anyone get busted for serving ayahuasca in this area. A few years ago, the feds did raid a local cactus shop because they were selling Wachuma and Peruvian torch cactus. But those are legal cactuses to grow and sell in the United States. But I think it was under the idea that you're not selling this for people's gardens. You're selling it because these are mescaline-containing cacti.
Yeah, prove it. Yeah, I know. But we're happy that we don't have to worry about that anymore.
All right. Well, we took a long walk to get here, but yes, we have now arrived back in Ecuador, and let's hear about what you guys are doing there. And I've also got, just letting the listeners know, I have you have several websites. We've got Alchemical Ayahuasca, which is about the book, but also that lists retreats on there. And then there is Spirit of Wisdom Healing, which also mentions the retreats. And then we have sacredvalleyspiritualretreat.com.
Yeah, that's the main one. That's the main
that would be the most direct. So now we are ready to talk about your retreats.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you. Yeah, when we moved down here, we were just going to carry on kind of with the same model as in Shasta with a maximum of 10. And then we realised, we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. We're sort of we offer a lot of other things other than ayahuasca, and so part of our work is doing other type of healing work and ayahuasca. So they're two separate offerings that we would offer in Mount Shasta. It would be ayahuasca retreat or other types of retreat, personal retreats or couples retreats. And we do offer a lot of different things like shamanic healing and hypnotherapy, breath work, brain spotting, different things like that. And we decided we wanted to incorporate everything into our retreats. And so you can only do that latter stuff with one-on-one, really, to the way that we do it. So we decided we would just work one-on-one or couples. And so two ways that's unusual. One, most ayahuasqueros I've met, they don't do healing work. Their healing work is ayahuasca. They might offer you herbal remedies or something, but they don't do sort of hands-on healing work. They certainly don't ask the questions that I ask, like, what was your relationship like with your dad? Because in their culture, the ayahuasquero is the dad or the grandfather or the aunt, and they don't really need people don't need integration. They live with the family, they all live all family, so everything is just part of their life. It's part of their worldview. In our culture, it's not part of a worldview. We sort of we need to integrate, and so a lot of the other stuff we do is also very helpful for the integration. But we are asking questions like, what was your relationship like with your dad? Partly because we have much more analytical minds, and we're much more used to sort of like linear thought than they are down there. They're not sort of rational in the way that we are. They don't sort of talk about traumas in the way that we talk about traumas, or sort of like the conditioning that they have is very different to what we experience in our culture. We're much more sort of thoughtful in that sort of mind state, and we're the sort of the eagle culture. They're the condor culture, and they're much more sort of more into sort of spirituality and softness and take life as it comes, rather than us, which is much more technological and scientific. So we incorporate all of that, and we're the only place in the world that does that, both what we offer and the fact we're doing only one-on-one or couples. So we're very specialized. Yeah. And so we have people come down for 7 nights, 8 days, and it's just them, and us, two of us. Diana is Hindu. She's from India originally, her cultural heritage. I have more of a Buddhist background. We leave the Christianity out of it, but we bring everything together. We also focus our ceremonies differently. We offer the anaconda ceremony, the jaguar ceremony, and the condor ceremony. And that's based very much on the sort of archetypal view of progression or the evolutionary process based on the Andean cultures. And so we actually direct each ceremony. The first one, the anaconda, would be more about sort of the purging, the cleansing and purification. The next one is the jaguar, which is more about the emotional state, the victim self. And then the last one, you ascend from the base up through the chakras to the 6th and 7th chakra, which is the condor, and that's more about ascension. But you can't just go straight to condor. You have to ascend from the bottom, the anaconda. So we're very focused. My healing work is focused on that throughout. I'm doing energy extractions throughout the process of doing the healing work and in the ceremonies, all related to those particular facets of the human experience and psyche. So it's very different to anything that I've ever experienced in ceremony or on retreat. And we love what we do. And because we only see one person or a couple, we don't see many people a year. But we love to work with people. Yeah.
With stripping it back that way and only working with individuals or couples, do you find that that's sustainable for you versus like having large group ceremonies where that's going to provide more income, more support for yourself?
Yeah. It's not. It's not sustainable, you know. And as I mentioned, in other two places I did this work, in Mount Shasta and San Francisco, I was very busy. I was doing pretty well financially. Down here, one of the great things about Ecuador is the cost of living is so low.
Right.
You know, and we don't have money stress. It doesn't matter if we don't have a client, you know, for a retreat. We don't have the money stress, so we can sort of relax. You know, we want money for. I'm on Social Security, thanks to the US government. So we can sort of support ourselves on that in a way. We do it because we love it, and you know, we want to help people in the deepest possible way. So that is our passion. You know, we love people, and so we're doing it for the love of people and to help them, you know, as much as we can. So it's different. You know, we changed our model, as I say, and the cost of living down here, like $100 a year for property tax, for example. You know, wow. It's a whole different world. You know, so we're grateful for that, and we can afford to do the individual retreats as a result.
All right. So where are the clientele coming from for this kind of work?
Kind of clientele. Well, the last three clients we had were actually all women over 60. That was unusual, but it seems like that is part of the range that people are looking for. I think, and they come to find us through a variety of different sources. One is because of Mount Shasta. Mount Shasta is a very high-profile place for spirituality and retreats. We still have a presence in Mount Shasta, so they find us through that. They find me through Graham Hancock. He sort of endorsed my book, and he's endorsed my website. So people like they come from, you know, one person I asked her how she came. She came from Dubai, and she said, I searched ChatGPT, and I put in who's the best shamanic healer in the United States. Came up number one for some strange reason, but that's not the case anymore. But it was when she typed it in, and so she came from that. People come from other podcasts, you know, different. So they're from all over the world, but the demographic changed in the last 3 weeks. There's women over 60 who've done a lot of inner work, you know. So we actually feel that we're going to start targeting, because we love that so much, we're going to start targeting people that are sort of, in a way, further on the path, because we don't necessarily want to be the person that introduces them to ayahuasca, although I feel we do it really well. We want to have people that have really done a lot of work in their spiritual life, and maybe with plant medicines, that we can help to sort of really develop a life, and I'm serious, life-changing shift, and we do that with everybody. I know that we do that, and you know, people always leave here raving and wanting us to be their spiritual parents or spiritual brother. We get very close, as you can imagine, in a week. So it's a variety of demographics. Now in California, a lot of the demographic was when I used to do retreats with 20 plus people, a lot of burners, you know, like the Burning Man crowd. Yeah, and it's almost like it was like a badge of honor. You had to do ayahuasca in your life, you know. So right. I got a lot of people who sort of didn't really want to change their lives. They just wanted to drink ayahuasca, and you know, just tell their friends about it. You know, ayahuasca this, ayahuasca that. Right. And no disrespect to them, but they weren't that serious. You could tell, you know. In Mount Shasta, it was a more serious crowd. You know, people that had maybe been to Rhythmia in Costa Rica, where they're drinking ayahuasca with 100 other people. They wanted a much more sort of intimate environment, and one where they felt they were going to be better taken care of, a bit more sort of committed to the path rather than the money. But we down here, we're you know, it's a select group. In a way, because it's one-on-one, that scares a lot of people. You know, that level of intimacy scares people. Some people, I wouldn't do it any other way, but some definitely, like, oh no, I want to be a bit more anonymous with 30 other people. I don't want to be sort of asked how my relationship was with my dad. And so they won't come down here. I know that, but it's okay, because we want people who are really committed and serious about wanting to go as deep as they possibly can, because we can help them. You know, we take them really deep, and we don't know what's going to be the best sort of modality for them. So we include a variety depending on what we feel would be best for them. Because sometimes ayahuasca isn't the most powerful experience for them. Sometimes it's the breath work.
Yeah.
You just people. Don't know.
Yeah. Well, I've always been a huge proponent of the one-on-one work and also the emphasis on doing energetic work or healing work in conjunction with medicine work and not just relying on the ceremony or the medicine to do the work, that there's room for people to take action and to do things in support of people's process. Yeah.
And I know you've done so. Have you been to Peru, did you say?
No, the furthest south I've been is Costa Rica.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, one of the conundrums is that when you go to places where they have indigenous healers, they become the healer. They're the healer, and it's like the doctor in Western medicine. They're the authority, and you often put both the doctor and the shaman on a pedestal, and they're taking power away from you, even though they're not necessarily trying to. You are giving your power up to them, and we are very clear that we want to have people maintain their power, that they are the authority. And so our retreats are run like that, rather than asking me what my experience was. It's like, well, it doesn't matter what my experience was. What was your experience? How can we help you to deepen your experience? And so we're very clear. We don't we're not on a pedestal. We are just there as friends and allies in the spiritual path, and stop that other stuff. We're not interested in it. I know some doctors, they want to be on the pedestal, not be questioned, like, you doubt my authority? I'm the doctor. What are you, a plumber? What do you know? So we're very, we're very much, okay, we can help you in the deepest possible way to help yourself. And, that's just the way we are.
Excellent. Well, Alan, I've just got a couple more quick questions for you, and then I'm going to let you go because I've had you for a while now. And I'll just mention to the listening audience that we've covered a lot of ground it's in the book, Alchemical Ayahuasca, but there's also quite a bit in the book that we have not talked about, so we could just leave that as a teaser, like go get the book if you want to learn more there. But before I let you go, I do want to ask you to tell the listening audience, like, if this sounds of interest to them, what's the best way for them to reach out and perhaps set up a trip to come down and work with you?
Yeah, the best way is to reach us through our website, sacredvalleyspiritualretreat.com. And on there's a calendar. It's very I feel it's a very thorough website. But on there's also a Calendly link to book a conference call with us. The other thing I need to mention is that we also do remote healing, because not everybody can make it down to Ecuador. So we do remote healing. Sometimes we recommend they do that before they come down to build a level of trust, but also they might realise they don't need to drink ayahuasca after at least the first healing. It's usually a 3 healing series, the anaconda, jaguar and condor. And there's a lot of energy extractions that happen there. But really the best way to contact us is through our website and the Calendly link. We always want a conference with you, definitely before coming on retreat, but you before the online healing via Zoom. And we'll make time for you in usually about half an hour.
Okay, great. And just to bring it back sort of for full circle to where we began, do you ever go back to London? And if so, what are your thoughts and feelings about it now?
Yeah, London. My mum is 94 in April, so I go and see her every year. But actually, fortunately, we're going to meet her in Spain in May, so I don't need to go back to London. London itself, I can spend a day. Fortunately, my family have spread out around the southeast and west of the country, mainly in beautiful places, so I get to not visit London but get to visit my family, so I'm happy with that. But I might just go to a museum in London. Other than that, I've lost touch with pretty much all my friends. We just moved away, we became very different people, so it's really just about family. Nice place to visit. One wouldn't want to live there.
Yeah. Okay, well, fair enough, Alan. Well, thank you so much for your time today and sharing so much of your own personal story and journey. It's been a pleasure to speak with you, and really appreciate everything you've had to share in our conversation today.
Thank you, Martin. I appreciate your podcast. I listen to a lot of great guests.
Great. Well, thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Martin.